At 77, I, Edward Williams, thought my life was over. My son betrayed me, my daughter-in-law schemed, and they pushed me away from the home that my wife, Helen, and I had built with our sweat and memories. I was trapped in Pine Grove, where old men like me were seen as mere shadows waiting to fade. But I was wrong. From the ashes, a new door opened. I found freedom again, a roof over my head overlooking the bay, real laughter from new friends, a genuine connection with my granddaughter, and even the warm glow of a belated love. This is not just a story about an old man reclaiming his home. This is a statement. I am not a burden. I am not a victim. I have come back to life. And if you think it is too late to start over, listen to my story. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. The spoon clinked softly against the bowl of oatmeal, the sound echoing unnaturally in the empty kitchen. I let out a weary sigh, remembering those mornings when Helen would sit across from me, sipping her tea and teasing me for putting too much sugar. Now, there was only the monotonous murmur of the television, thin, lifeless, incapable of filling the hollow silence of the house. Then it came. My heart sank. The sound of an engine roared up the driveway, dragging chaos with it straight to my doorstep. Through the window, I caught sight of a polished SUV, its sleek frame glinting under the morning sun, looking strangely out of place on the dew-soaked lawn. Helen and I once trimmed together with our own hands. The doors opened. Out stepped Michael, his wife Beatrix, and their 2 children, followed by the heavy thud of 6 bulging suitcases. Beatrix yanked open the trunk, pulling luggage with a scowl, as though even the damp air of the morning had already spoiled her mood. She didn't spare me a glance. Her eyes stayed fixed on the glow of her phone, her mouth busy with a clipped rapid-fire conversation through her earpiece. Michael forced a smile in my direction. But it was a smile only in form, strained, uncomfortable, like a mask trying to hide reluctance. I caught the flicker of his eyes avoiding mine, a look so far removed from the boy who once ran headlong into my arms after every long business trip. "Don't worry, we'll arrange everything," he said briskly. "You'll hardly need to bother yourself at all." It was meant to reassure, but it landed like distance, a reminder that, in their eyes, I was little more than a lodger in my own home. I stood frozen on the porch as they carried on, moving in with the quiet assumption of permanence. The wind from the bay cut through my worn robe, sharp and cold. In my mind I heard Helen's voice, gentle but certain. "This house will be the last place of our peace." But that peace had already dissolved, vanished right there on my front steps. It took me about 10 minutes to gather my thoughts, but by then, Beatrix was already tearing through the refrigerator. I stood frozen, a statue in my own kitchen, as the food I had carefully bought just 2 days earlier with my trembling hands was tossed straight into the trash. Each dull thud against the plastic bin struck me like a hammer blow, not just groceries discarded, but fragments of my ordinary life, memories of quiet breakfasts and simple routines, cast away without a shred of care. Meanwhile, Michael wandered through the house as though he were taking inventory of an inheritance already signed over. His shoes clicked against the wooden floorboards, the sound echoing down the hall. Phone pressed to his ear, he pushed open doors one by one, glancing inside like an appraiser marking off items on a list, his tone casual, but his behavior cutting deep, as though this home no longer belonged to me. When the matter of the master bedroom arose, my chest tightened violently, as if an invisible hand were closing around it. That room was no mere sleeping space, it was a sanctuary of memory, a temple of whispered midnight conversations with Helen, where the years had folded gently around us like a quilt. "Father, it makes sense for us to use the larger room," Michael said, his voice carrying that same rehearsed patience that felt more like dismissal than respect. Before I could respond, Beatrix's voice cut in smooth on the surface but cold and unyielding beneath. It rang out with a chilling finality, sugar-coated steel determined to crush any resistance. Later, as I carried my belongings into the small side room that was to become my new quarters, every object I touched unleashed a current of memory. My hands trembled as I lingered over an old photograph, fingertips brushing the frame, as though letting go might erase Helen's presence from the house entirely. By the time night fell, I stepped into the living room and stopped short. The home I had known for 40 years was gone. In its place stood something garish and unfamiliar, strange framed prints on the walls, glittering but soulless decorations spread across the shelves. The warmth of Miriam's touch, her quiet presence embedded in every corner, had been replaced by an alien sterility. My house no longer resembled a home. It looked, instead, like a cheap hotel, hollow, impersonal, and utterly foreign to me. And in the middle of it all, as if to drive the insult deeper, Michael's oversized suitcase still sat unopened in the center of the living room floor, an obtrusive monument to my displacement. The smell of steamed vegetables and a delicate salad filled the table, overwhelming the familiar flavors of dinners I once shared with Miriam. I sat at the head of the table, the place of the homeowner, yet I felt like an outsider, awkwardly squeezed into a feast that no longer belonged to me. Ingram and Beatrix chatted animatedly, laughing softly, exchanging glances that seemed to carry private meanings only the two of them could understand. Each time I thought of joining the conversation, the words caught in my throat, as though my presence wasn't meant to be acknowledged at all. Beatrix finally gestured toward the kitchen with a look of disdain. "That yellow is so blinding and outdated it makes me sick every time I step in there," she shrugged, flicking her wooden spoon in the air like a judge delivering a final verdict, not even bothering to look at me. "That color was Miriam's choice," I said firmly. I remembered the moment vividly, Miriam laughing softly, holding a palette of swatches in her hand, insisting that sunshine yellow would make the kitchen glow with warmth even on stormy days. Now, that memory had been reduced to a dismissive label. Outdated. Ingram leaned back in his chair, his tone clipped and businesslike. "Dad, you have to understand this will increase the property's value. People today prefer neutral, modern colors. You can't cling forever to the old-fashioned style." His voice sounded less like a son speaking to his father and more like a realtor persuading a hesitant client. I turned my eyes toward them and caught the brief glance they exchanged, a fleeting but unmistakable flash of calculation. It wasn't just about paint on the walls. That look carried the weight of a secret pact, like two conspirators sealing an unspoken contract. A chill crept down my spine. They were planning something much larger than redecorating. After dinner, the grandchildren quickly disappeared upstairs, their laughter echoing down the hallway, leaving me alone with Beatrix in the kitchen. I reached for a plate to slide into the dishwasher, just as I had done for years, when her sharp voice cut through the air. "Edward, you're doing it wrong again. The dishes have to be washed clean first, otherwise the machine will break. I honestly don't understand how you've lived this long without knowing something so basic." Her words stung, not because of what she said, but how she said it, like I was a clueless child being scolded. Ingram sat nearby, laptop open, fingers tapping rhythmically against the keys. He didn't even lift his head when he spoke. His tone was flat, mechanical, like a manager issuing commands to a subordinate. "Just listen to her, Dad. She knows how it should be done." Not a glance in my direction, not even a flicker of recognition. I retreated to my new room. The narrow bed creaked under my weight, its coldness pressing against me like a silent reproach. I leaned back against the wall, feeling like an exile banished from my own kingdom. Later that evening, I walked into the living room to find Beatrix rearranging the shelves. My heart clenched when I saw the empty space where my record collection had once been. "Oh, those dusty old records," she said casually. I threw them out. They looked filthy, as if no one would ever want to touch them. She lit a scented candle, its sweet perfume replacing the musty scent of vinyl, as though purging the last traces of my life from the house. I stumbled toward the trash bin outside. My breath caught in my throat. There they were. Not just the records, but photo albums too, tossed in among rotting vegetable peels and crushed beer cans. My chest tightened. Those albums held my entire life, my wedding to Miriam, the childhood of Ingram, the fragile beginnings of a family that once felt whole. Now they lay discarded, indistinguishable from garbage. When I confronted them, Ingram waved me off with a detached shrug. "We're only trying to tidy up." His voice was indifferent, his eyes stripped of anything resembling a son's warmth. Instead, I saw the cold stare of a man surveying a future inheritance, eager to control what he already believed was his. I carried what I could salvage back to my small room: photographs, cracked vinyls, scraps of memory Beatrix hadn't yet destroyed. Piece by piece, I built a hidden fortress. It was no longer just a bedroom, it was a secret archive, the last stronghold of a life systematically erased from every corner of the house. That night, sitting on my narrow bed, I opened one of the photo albums I had managed to rescue from the trash. My fingers trembled as they slid across each page, the brittle paper whispering like voices from the past. Every face in those photographs seemed to stare back at me, silently demanding, "Are you going to let this house slip away?" A soft knock at the door pulled me from my reverie. The sound was hesitant, almost apologetic, as if the person outside feared disturbing me. My heart tightened with unease, an instinct telling me this visit was not harmless. The door creaked open, and Alwyn stepped in. Her shoes, damp from the rain, left small trails across the wooden floor. She paused, her eyes sweeping over the cramped room, now crowded with the relics I had hidden away like contraband. For the first time, she seemed to see me not as her grandfather, but as a refugee inside his own home. She sat down hesitantly and lowered her voice. "Grandpa, I need to tell you something, but please don't let them know I did." My pulse quickened. "What is it, child?" She swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "Mom said it clearly. Grandpa and Grandma on her side will be moving in here. They sold their house in Rehoboth. It's all decided." My chest constricted, as though the cold rain seeping through the window frame had pierced straight into my bones. Alwyn bit her lip before continuing. "And there's more. They've been talking about sending you to a nursing home. They say you'll have nurses, meals on schedule, nothing to worry about." She hesitated, her voice faltering. "It sounds like comfort, but I can hear it in their tone. It's not care, it's abandonment dressed up as convenience." For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. Then something broke inside me. I shot to my feet, the wooden chair screeching across the floor. My voice shook, not with weakness but with fury. "I have kept myself alive for 77 years. I worked 40 years as a postal inspector, built this very house with Miriam's hands beside mine, and now they dare to call me useless, a burden to be discarded?" Alwyn flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. I softened instantly, guilt piercing through my anger. "I'm sorry, Alwyn," I murmured, reaching out to touch her hand. Her young fingers quivered against mine, fragile with emotion. She had never seen me this enraged, nor this broken. "I don't want to see you hurt," she whispered. I steadied my breath, squeezing her hand gently. "I won't be cast aside so easily. Let them plan their schemes. I'm not going to give up without a fight." In the evening, just as Alwyn had predicted, we all gathered in the living room. Ingram sat rigidly upright, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles turned white, as if he were holding back a storm inside him. Beatrix, on the other hand, made no effort to hide her restlessness. Her heel tapped against the wooden floor in steady, impatient beats, like a metronome counting down to a verdict that had already been decided. Ingram finally cleared his throat. "We want to talk to you about the future." I gave a short, bitter laugh, the sound scraping the silence of the room. It rang with such sharpness that even Alwyn flinched, bowing her head as though to escape its echo. Beatrix leaned forward, her voice sugary sweet, but her eyes gleamed with triumph. "Edward, you've been forgetting your medication, skipping meals, wandering around without eating properly. It's clear you can't manage alone anymore." Her words dripped with false concern, but beneath the veneer I could hear the gavel of judgment, striking hard. I let out a dry, cutting laugh, my gaze locked on her. "Worried about me, are you? Funny, I thought you were more worried about making room for your parents' bed." For a moment, the air thickened. Then Beatrix pressed on, undeterred. She launched into a glowing description of Pine Grove, the pool, the library, the nature outings. Her voice painted a picture of luxury, but in my mind all I saw were newspaper headlines about neglected elders rotting in moldy rooms, cared for by overworked staff, with no heart left to give. "You have to understand, Dad," Ingram added, his tone clinical, like a broker explaining market shifts. "This will increase the value of the property. Buyers want modern, clean spaces. You can't cling to the past forever." His words weren't those of a son, they were a sales pitch, cold and transactional. Then, Beatrix's voice sharpened, each word like ice. "Ingram has already consulted a lawyer. With just 2 doctors' signatures, guardianship can be transferred. If you refuse, Edward, you'll have no say in your own life." I heard my heart thudding in my ears, like a drum heralding an execution. A silence fell, crushing and heavy. I shut my eyes, tasting bitterness rising in my throat. When I finally spoke, the words came slowly, each one jagged as if carved with a knife. "Fine, I'll go to your nursing home, but don't think for a moment that I'll ever forgive you. The price you'll pay won't just be an old man's resentment, it will be far heavier than that." The next 3 days passed like a blur, filled with the sound of boxes being sealed and the slow dismantling of my life. I watched Beatrix flick her hand dismissively, signaling the movers to haul away my old boxes of books. The thud of hardcovers striking against each other sounded like the final sighs of my past. Each volume shoved into a crate felt like a memory being strangled. My collection of stamps, the carefully catalogued albums, even Miriam's recipe cards, everything was stripped from its place, reduced to clutter in someone else's eyes. Only Alwyn dared to act differently. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," she whispered as she slid one of my albums into the corner of a small suitcase. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling, as though she feared the memories themselves might be thrown into the trash, along with the other nameless things. Before leaving, I stood by the bay one last time. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves kissing the rocks, their rhythm achingly familiar. For a fleeting moment, I swore I heard Miriam laughing behind me, calling my name just as she used to, but when I opened my eyes, there was only the cold fog, settling heavy over the emptiness. On the ride to Pine Grove, I pressed my hand against the cold car window as we passed landmarks of my life. The florist's shop blurred by, and with it the memory of roses Miriam once pressed into the pages of her books. The glass chilled my palm, and I felt a small flame in my chest flicker out. Pine Grove itself was a monument of despair, a gray brick building, square and suffocating. The air was thick with the stench of disinfectant and stale food. Windows, cloudy with age, reflected the hollow figures of elderly residents slumped in wheelchairs, silent as phantoms. They looked less like people than prisoners, counting down an endless sentence. At the entrance, Ingram muttered something about visiting soon. His voice cracked, but his eyes avoided mine, and I knew the promise was as worthless as scrap paper discarded the moment it was spoken. Beatrix kept her composure, almost smug as she surveyed the facility. Her hand lingered on Ingram's arm like a victor savoring her triumph. Then Alwyn threw her arms around me. Her tears soaked my shirt as she sobbed. "I'll come see you, Grandpa. I promise." I held her tightly, clutching the last warmth of youth I might ever feel against my frail chest. That embrace was the final shred of humanity I touched before stepping into my new prison. The first week at Pine Grove was a descent into despair. Every meal was the same, a plastic tray of watery stew and limp vegetables. Holding the spoon felt like scooping up ashes, each bite the taste of my own fading life. Nights were worse. The halls echoed with haunting sounds, the muffled, broken sobs of a woman in the room next door, crying out the name of a child who would never return. Her cries seeped through the walls, slipping into my dreams, making them heavy with grief. I waited, day after day, for the knock of a visitor, for a familiar face to walk through the door. But it never arrived. On the 10th day of my stay at Pine Grove, something happened that changed everything. I was hunched over, trying to choke down the bland stew they called chicken, when a voice rose above the clatter of trays, a voice shaky yet laced with astonishment. "Edward. Edward the lamb? It can't be." The spoon slipped from my hand, clattering loudly against the plastic tray. My head jerked up, and for a moment, I froze. Standing there was a tall, gaunt man with a ragged silver beard, but his eyes still carried the same brightness I remembered. Ferris Dunham. My whole body went rigid, and my heart pounded wildly, as if someone had dragged me back 20 years to the days we stood shoulder to shoulder at the post office. We sat across from each other, the cafeteria table trembling under the weight of memory. I forced a bitter smile. My son thinks this place suits me better than my own home. Ferris frowned, his weathered hands tightening around a flimsy plastic cup. His voice rasped. This world is cruel, Edward. Sometimes it isn't strangers who push us over the edge, it's blood, our own kin. He stroked his gray beard as he spoke, eyes fixed on some distant horizon. He told me about the day his daughter sold his house without asking, the day he watched movers load up the belongings of a lifetime and vanish down the street. His voice grew hoarse, and I noticed the tremor in his aged fingers every time he spoke of that final slam of the front door closing behind him. Then he looked at me with sharpness that cut straight through. The house, it's still legally yours, isn't it? I hesitated, the silence dragging out before I finally nodded. The gesture felt like turning a blade inward on myself. That house where Miriam and I had laughed on the porch, where I once taught Alwyn to ride a bicycle, was now nothing more than the spoils of betrayal. Ferris leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, like an accomplice whispering in the dead of night. Do you realize, Edward, if the house is still in your name, you hold the power to shatter their little kingdom with nothing but a signature? Sell it right out from under them. Show them you are not helpless. His words cracked across my mind like a bolt of lightning splitting the night sky. My spoon fell from my hand again, and the room tilted around me. For the first time since stepping into Pine Grove, a spark ignited within me, not joy, but something fiercer, the fire of retribution. Are you suggesting I sell the house out from under their noses? I whispered, my voice unsteady yet burning with a new, dangerous clarity. I froze, my heart pounding as if someone had just cracked open a door that had been locked for years. A faint ray of hope slipped into the darkness, where I thought no light would ever return. Ferris watched me closely, the corners of his mouth curling into a half-smile, part secretive, part certain, as though he had anticipated my reaction all along. In my mind, a vision erupted. I saw Ingram's face drain of color, his eyes wide with disbelief, while Beatrix let her crystal glass of organic wine slip from her hand, shattering on the tiled floor. The sound of breaking glass echoed sweetly in my imagination, like a symphony announcing that justice had finally come home. The following morning, Ferris hobbled out into the garden with me, leaning on his cane. He gave a subtle nod toward the wrought iron gate, where it creaked open to reveal a tall man in a modest but sharply tailored suit. His polished shoes gleamed in the sunlight with each step. Ferris patted my shoulder, lowering his voice as though he were unveiling a trump card. This is Horace, my grandson. Horace Dunham extended his hand with the confidence of someone used to making deals. Ferris's eyes gleamed with quiet pride as he added, he's one of the sharpest real estate brokers in the state. If anyone can help you pull this off, it's him. I shook Horace's hand, but the unease lingered. I had tossed and turned all night on the rock-hard bed at Pine Grove, replaying 100 scenarios in my mind. Could a 7-year-old man, stripped of dignity and cornered like a ghost in his own house, really turn the tables? Or was this nothing more than a desperate dream, destined to collapse into even greater humiliation? Horace spoke with the calm efficiency of a surgeon, explaining a procedure. He outlined how I still held the keys, how we could arrange discreet showings while Ingram and Beatrix were away, how he would handle the paperwork without leaving a single trace until it was too late. His voice was steady, convincing, as though secrecy was second nature to him. I felt a strange thrill rising in me. The plan sounded less like a business transaction and more like a covert operation. I was no longer just an old man abandoned by his family. I was back in my days as an inspector, Except now the ones I had to outmaneuver weren't criminals on the street but my own son and daughter-in-law under my very roof. Every detail, the hidden keys in my pocket, the careful timing of fake errands, the secrecy of our meetings felt like preparations for one final clandestine mission of my life. 3 days later, Horace called me with news. The first family wanted to view the house. I hesitated, the phone warm against my ear, my breath uneven. Horace calmly reassured me. "Mr. Williams, this isn't illegal. The house is yours. You have every right." His words were like a rope pulling me up from a deep pit of doubt. I gripped the armrest of my chair, my heart still racing, but my mind finally nodded. Perhaps I wasn't committing a crime at all, perhaps I was simply reclaiming the right to live on my own terms. On the morning of the showing, I put on my only suit, worn but still serviceable. My hands trembled as I looped the frayed tie around my neck. The faint scent of cheap cologne lingered on my collar. When I glanced at the mirror, an old man looked back at me, yet in his eyes there was no longer only helplessness. There was resolve. The Webster family arrived first. They toured the house briskly, speaking in cool, clipped tones. Mrs. Webster ran her manicured fingers across the kitchen counter with disapproval. "This will all have to go," she said. In that moment I didn't see her hand, I saw Miriam's, gently laying out cookies for the children on that same counter. To hear her memory dismissed so casually felt like a blade cutting through flesh. When they left, I slumped into Horace's car. As we drove away, I turned to look back through the window. The house faded into the trees, blurred by the morning mist. It felt like another farewell, another loss piled upon the rest. But then came Thornton Barrington. From the moment he extended his hand, I felt something different. His handshake was warm and firm, his eyes alight with sincerity, as though he were greeting an old friend, not a stranger selling a home. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Williams," he said. We spoke at length, not just about square footage or property lines, but about life. He told me about afternoons fishing with his grandfather, the lessons passed down in the quiet patience of those waters. As he spoke, my vision blurred. In my mind, Miriam was once again on the porch, smiling as I raked leaves. I twisted my wedding band nervously, steadying myself against the wave of emotion. Then came the words that shifted everything. Thornton leaned closer, his voice steady. "If you agree to sell, I'll build a guest house on the property just for you, a place where you can live comfortably for the rest of your days." For a moment, time stopped. In his offer, I saw more than bricks and mortar. I saw dignity, freedom, and belonging. That little house would not just be a place to live, it would be proof that my life still had value, that my old age still had an anchor. The Websters had left me cold, reminding me of what I had lost. But Thornton Barrington offered me something I hadn't dared to hope for, a future. And for the first time in years, I felt adrenaline surge through me, not despair, but excitement. Friday came and went, and with it the last of the formalities. The papers were signed, notarized, and neatly stacked in a leather folder that Horace carried like a treasure chest. As the lawyer slid the final document across the polished oak desk, my hand trembled for a moment before I pressed the pen firmly to the page. With that stroke of ink, my life shifted. Thornton Barrington clasped my hand, his grip warm and steady. "Congratulations, Mr. Williams," the lawyer said. "The property transfer will be registered within 3 business days. By then, the house will officially belong to Mr. Barrington." Thornton smiled, and unlike the shallow pleasantries of strangers, his expression radiated sincerity. "Remember, Edward, I promised you more than just a sale. I promised you a future, and I intend to keep that promise." His words struck deeper than he knew. I thought of Michael and Elaine, of their smug certainty that they had secured control over my home and, by extension, over me. For weeks, I had been suffocating in their web of manipulation. Now, suddenly, I felt a crack in that net, a surge of freedom long denied. That night, alone in my room at Pine Grove, I stared at the check resting inside the safe Horace had arranged for me. I touched the paper, as if to confirm it was real. My chest rose and fell with an unfamiliar rhythm. Not despair, not bitterness, but a fragile excitement. For the first time in years, I was not reacting to their plans. I was making my own. Horace, ever the strategist, advised caution. Wait until the registry confirms the transfer before saying anything. Then, when you do, we'll be ready, and Mr. Barrington will stand beside you. I nodded, though my pulse quickened at the thought. In my mind's eye, I saw Michael's face blanching, Elaine's hand frozen mid-gesture, a glass of organic wine slipping from her grasp to shatter against the tiled floor. The sound echoed in my imagination, sweet, sharp, and liberating, like a hymn of justice finally sung aloud. 2 days later the confirmation came. The house was no longer mine. It was Thornton's round. Yet the irony made me smile. Though the deed had left my name, for the first time in a long time, I felt that my life was once again mine to command. As we drove back from the lawyer's office, Thornton glanced at me. "Edward, are you ready for what comes next?" I adjusted the knot of my worn tie, still carrying the faint scent of cologne I hadn't worn in years. In the reflection of the car window, I saw the face of an old man, but his eyes burned with something sharper than resignation. "Yes," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. "I'm ready." Because no matter what happened at that party, no matter how Michael and Elaine reacted, I was no longer the helpless victim shuffled into corners. I had chosen. I was back in control of my life. Michael had visited me at Pine Grove earlier that week, though visit was far too generous a word. He stayed less than half an hour, mostly complaining about work and tossing off casual remarks about how I looked like I was already halfway in the grave. Each sentence he spoke was like a dull knife scraping against my heart. He never once looked me in the eye, as though I had become an old piece of furniture left in the wrong room. When he finally admitted that Elaine's parents had moved into my house, I forced my face to remain calm, though my chest pounded furiously. In my mind, Miriam's voice rose clear and sharp. "Edward, this house was our life, not a boarding house for opportunists." The night before the party, I lay awake on the narrow iron bed of Pine Grove, staring at the ceiling. I pictured Elaine pouring wine for guests in my own living room, her laugh echoing beneath the chandelier Miriam had chosen decades ago. The thought made my blood boil, but at the same time, it steeled me. Tomorrow, the masquerade would end. When I finally stepped back into my house the next day, just as the guests were arriving, the air was thick with luxury perfumes mingling with the artificial sweetness of scented candles. It struck me hard. Miriam and I had only ever lit simple vanilla candles at Christmas, filling the space with warmth instead of vanity. Now, the house gleamed with glittering decor, but it had no soul. Michael opened the door in a half-buttoned shirt, clearly unprepared for who stood behind Horace and Thornton Barrington. His face drained of color when he saw me. "Father, what are you doing here?" I walked inside slowly, scanning the room that once carried my memories. With a calmness sharpened by fury, I turned to him and spoke, my words dropping like hammers into the silence. "I have sold this house. The contract was registered yesterday. In 30 days, this place will no longer be yours." Music died mid-note. Conversations froze. A suffocating silence swept over the room. Elaine's face contorted, her hand tightening around a glass of wine. Michael's eyes widened in disbelief, his lips quivering as though he might scream. At that moment, Elaine's parents entered the room. Prudence lifted her chin, her stare slicing through me as if she could rip the truth apart with her gaze. Gar stood tall and rigid like a statue, but the way his fists clenched behind his back betrayed his restrained rage. Guests began arriving one after another, the doorbell ringing in relentless bursts like the drums of war. Each time the door opened, another painted smile entered, thickening the air with false cheer. Glasses of wine shimmered in candlelight, but no one seemed to taste them. Michael leaned close to me, his voice a low hiss. "We'll contest this. You can't possibly think this contract will hold." I leaned forward, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. "You can sue me. You can shout, but the papers bear the red seal. The more you struggle, the deeper you'll sink." Prudence sputtered about canceling the party, but Elaine, desperate to maintain appearances, insisted the evening must go on. So the charade continued, music playing, glasses clinking, guests laughing nervously, all while the foundation of their lives had just crumbled beneath them. When it was finally time to leave, Thornton, Horace, and I walked toward the door. Michael blocked my way, his voice trembling with rage. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." I looked him straight in the eye, my voice icy calm. "I've regretted many things, Michael, but taking back my life will never be one of them." As we drove away, I glanced into the rearview mirror. There he was, Michael shrinking on the porch, shoulders hunched like a boy who had just lost his favorite toy. His glare burned with anger, but beneath it, I saw something roar, more primal, fear. The fear of a man who had suddenly lost control of the game and didn't know what to do next. "Where to now?" Horace asked as he steered the car away from Thornton Barrington's office. "I suppose I should pack what's left of my belongings and wait for the new place to be ready," I replied. "Don't worry about the wait," Thornton said warmly. "I've already arranged with a contractor to start on the guest house next week. In the meantime, I've secured an apartment for you on the coast. It's fully furnished and, of course, the expenses are mine." I turned to him, gratitude rising in my chest. For the first time in years, someone was offering me dignity rather than pity. As the car hummed along, I couldn't help but picture Michael and Elaine's faces when they discovered the house was sold. The image of Michael's pale, stricken expression and Elaine dropping her glass in shock made me chuckle softly to myself. Yet beneath the laughter, a trace of sorrow lingered. They were still my blood, but greed had long eclipsed whatever love once bound us. Not long after, the phone rang. Michael's voice cracked through the receiver like that of a man stripped bare. "Father, you've betrayed us. We have nothing now." I held my tone steady. "No, Michael. What you've lost isn't a home, it's the illusion that everything in this world was yours by right." Later that week, Elaine arrived with the grandchildren. She swept into the Pine Grove common room in a fur coat far too extravagant for someone claiming hardship. Her hug was cold, her smile pasted on like glue. But then Alwyn rushed into my arms, holding me tightly. The warmth of her embrace thawed something inside me I hadn't felt in years. At one point, Elaine leaned close, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Mr. Williams, we'll find the money soon. You should reconsider with Barrington, negotiate with us instead." I let out a booming laugh that startled even her. "Negotiate? So I can return to being a prisoner in my own home? Thank you, but no." When I finally stepped into the apartment Thornton had rented, I froze on the threshold. Sunlight poured in through wide glass windows, catching the scent of new wood. I remembered the dim, suffocating room at Pine Grove, where the sun barely crept through a slit of a window. Now I had an entire sky, waiting beyond a curtain's pull. Thornton had even arranged for me to meet a financial advisor. Emily, a young woman with kind eyes, showed me neat portfolios and projections. "Mr. Williams, with the proceeds of your sale and your pension, you can live more than comfortably," she explained. As she pointed to the rising graphs, I quietly removed my glasses, wiping at the corner of my eye before she noticed. All my life, I had lived frugally, never daring to dream beyond survival. Now here I was, choosing between travel and perhaps even buying a piano, something Miriam once wished for me. The sensation was both foreign and liberating. That evening, I sat by the window of the apartment, the ocean's rhythm in my ears, and I began writing a list of things I had always wanted but never allowed myself. A trip to Europe Miriam and I once dreamed of, a Caribbean cruise, photography classes, a proper suit that fit dinners in fine restaurants. For the first time in decades, I felt not just alive, but eager for life. Live life to the fullest. The phrase clung to me like a vow. At 77, I was no longer the abandoned old man wasting away in Pine Grove. I was a free man, master of my fate, and for the first time in half a lifetime, I was truly living, not merely existing. Live life to the fullest. The phrase echoed in my head long after Emily had spoken it. That night I pulled open an old drawer, and took out a leather-bound notebook, its cover faded with age. It was the same notebook Helen once used to jot down little dreams, holidays we never took, recipes she wanted to try, places she hoped to visit. Running my fingers over the rough paper, I began to write. Each line I penned felt like exhuming something I had buried years ago, under the weight of work, duty, and fear. A trip to Europe, a Caribbean cruise, photography classes I always yearned for but never pursued, a new suit, weekly dinners at fine restaurants. For the first time in decades, I was planning a life, not merely enduring one. Every Saturday, Alwyn came to see me. Our footsteps echoed along the cobblestone path by the waterfront, blending with the crash of waves and the calls of seabirds. At times she looped her arm through mine, as though afraid the sea breeze might carry me away. Her laughter spilled into the air as she spoke of school projects, friends, and dreams. Her eyes shining with a light so young, so free, it warmed me more than the sun overhead. I realized then how many ordinary, beautiful moments I had missed while living under the same roof with her and Michael. But the peace never lasted long. Michael and Elaine continued their visits, each appearance thickening the air in the room. Michael's eyes carried a strange mix of pleading and calculation, while Elaine's voice dripped honey that burned like vinegar. I listened. I nodded, but beneath the table my fists clenched tight, hiding the storm boiling inside me. One afternoon, I set my teacup down and looked Michael squarely in the eye. "I've placed part of the money into an educational trust for Alwyn and Terrence," I said, slowly and firmly. "It will grow with them and will only unlock when they are mature enough to step into their own lives. No one else, not even you, can touch it." The room fell silent. Only the clock ticked on the wall, punctuating my words like a gavel's strike. Thornton often visited me during the construction of the guest house. One day, as we stood watching the workers lay bricks, his gaze lingered on the rising walls. "I always dreamed of having a big family," he confessed, voice tight with emotion. "But my wife passed too soon, and we had no children. Business consumed everything. Only now, when I'm older, do I see what I missed." His eyes misted, and without thinking, I placed a hand on his shoulder. No words were needed. The gesture was enough. I knew too well what it was like to lose what mattered most. In time, I too began to change. A new wardrobe, a sharper haircut, it seemed trivial. But when I stood before the mirror, the reflection startled me. Gone was the defeated old man. The man staring back had steady eyes, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Helen," I whispered softly, "I've found myself again." From the photography classes, I met new friends, fellow enthusiasts who rose before dawn to capture misty beaches and circling gulls. Among them was Margaret Hayes, a 72-year-old widow with keen wit and a sparkle in her eyes. Her silver hair was neatly tied back, her words laced with poetry and mischief that often made me laugh before I realized it. Margaret didn't just enter a room, she brightened it, as if carrying her own secret lantern. One Saturday morning, Alwyn looked at me across a cafe table by the river. Her smile was both proud and tender. "You've changed, grandfather," she said, tilting her head thoughtfully. "It's like you've been reborn." Her words struck deep, a pang of pain and joy all at once. My throat tightened, but my heart swelled. I reached for her hand across the table. "I'm so happy for you, grandfather," she whispered, eyes glistening. "You deserve to be happy." And for the first time in many, many years, I truly believed her. In early June, nearly 3 months after selling the house, the guest house by the bay was finally complete. When I stepped inside, the scent of fresh wood still lingered in the air. June sunlight poured through the wide glass windows, painting the room in golden warmth. Small details caught my eye: the polished handrails in the bathroom, the smooth floor without thresholds, the wide doors ready for a walker or wheelchair if I ever needed one. Everything seemed designed for me, for an old man who still craved freedom and independence. I ran my hand gently along the wall, and for the first time in years, my heart swelled with the certainty of a new beginning. Thornton spared no effort in marking the occasion. He prepared champagne and even a small cake with the words, "Welcome home, Edward," written across it. When the guests arrived, Laughter rose and filled the air, drowning out even the distant sound of the waves. Martha busied herself arranging trays of appetizers, while Alwyn darted around excitedly, tugging me toward each group of visitors, proudly introducing me as if I were the guest of honor, which, in truth, I was. Later, I stood on the terrace with a glass of champagne in hand. The sea breeze whipped at my coat, carrying the briny scent of salt. The liquid sparkled in the fading sunlight, glowing like a rose-colored gem. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, and in the hush I imagined Helen standing beside me, smiling the way she once did. But this time, instead of sorrow, my heart found peace in acceptance. I raised my glass and drew in a long, steady breath. "We often believe that time is against us," I said, my voice trembling but strong. "But no, too often, it is we who are against ourselves. To begin again, to say no to manipulation, to say yes to our own lives, that takes courage. At 77, I finally understand this truth, and I hope none of you will wait as long as I did to learn it." My words hung in the air, heavy but liberating. Around me, glasses lifted high, and a chorus of "To a New Life" answered back. For a fleeting moment, I thought of Michael and Elaine. They were like shadows across the distant bay, still there, but unable to reach me anymore. Bitterness no longer clung to me. Forgiveness? Perhaps not yet. But release, yes, I had released them, like ashes scattered after the fire has burned out. Margaret Hayes's hand brushed lightly against mine, warm, certain. Her voice broke gently through the chatter around us. "What are you thinking, Edward?" I turned to see her wise eyes, steady and curious. Without hesitation, I squeezed her hand softly, as if sealing my passage through the doorway into a new life. Happiness, I realized, was never about grand victories or mansions or bank accounts. Happiness was here in Margaret's quiet smile, in the way Alwyn's voice rose above the sea wind calling, "Grandfather," in the clinking of glasses with friends who truly celebrated me. True freedom was not somewhere distant. It was the ability to breathe deeply, to smile at sunset without regret, and to trust that tomorrow would bring another chance to begin anew. At 77, I was not finished. I was finally, truly alive.